we're gonna have some word play tonight, or word. I won't say association. We're gonna do some etymology. I'll tell you what that is in a little bit because I don't know what the definition is off the top of my head, but I got it written down. But we're gonna talk a little bit. We're gonna talk about stewardship with a little different twist. And I hope you're okay with that. I mean, the guys at prayer tonight were, so you're kind of stuck with it. I mean, you're going to get what you're going to get. I prayed about it. I don't know how folks like Taylor preach every Sunday. It takes me weeks to prepare to talk one of these things. Now, I suppose if I did it more often, I might get a better routine, better habits. But it takes me weeks to prepare. And my poor little brain goes, I mean, God's always yapping at it in a good way. And I'm like, should I change that? Should I fix that? Should I do something different? So at some point I have to go, okay, God, this is it, unless you really wake me up and tell me to change it. So anyhow, that's where we're at. So happy Monday. Best day of the week if you're retired like me, because it's just like a Thursday or a Friday or a Saturday or a Tuesday. Everybody get a chance to watch the Super Bowl yesterday? Woo! Everybody happy? Yes, all right. Hopefully the team you're rooting for won. I didn't really have a dog in the hunt. I was a Detroit Lions, Buffalo Bills guy. They both sat home. But I was glad to see Kansas City lose. I mean, I'm not that I'm against anybody, and I think they got some great players, but I was ready to see them not be the winners on Sunday. So, okay. Anyways, so I told you we're going to talk about stewardship. If you've been here any length of time, you've heard us talk about it. We've talked about it a few times. I've talked about it a couple times. It's a broad topic, huge topic. I'm going to put a little fresh spin on it. But I'm also going to talk about ways we can put some of that into action. If you were at prayer time tonight, we talked about practical ways that God can use us. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do that in the community we have here at Upward Men. But I'm going to put out a quick request first. We're looking to do an Upward Men podcast. Right? So we do the video that comes out every week. We have this meeting. But we're going to do a podcast. We have the equipment. We have the location. We have the desire. But what we really lack is kind of the experience, if you will. I mean, somebody who can produce it, someone who can put it together, someone who can help us do the podcast, right? So if you're that person, or you know somebody who's got that person, we'd love to talk to you. We'd like to start the podcast with Ty, Terry, Mark, and myself, kind of setting the stage, setting the vision and all that. But then after that, kind of the other folks sitting in, whoever's producing it could kind of be the questioner, the kind of drive that piece of it. You know, so if you're somebody who wants to do a podcast, who's looking to do a podcast, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to have you help us out, get that set up, and then, I mean, the sky's the limit, right? It's limitless of what we can do with that. And then one other thing we're looking for is someone who's familiar at all, or wants to be familiar at all with like Facebook ads or Google ads, because that's another place we're looking to get into. We'd like to talk to you about that, and all these things. I mean, it's not just doing things to do things, right? It's all in line with our mission that we think God has told us to go reach men in Whatcom County, right? So that's what it's about. It's not just doing stuff to do stuff. It's really doing stuff to reach men, right? So if those things interest you, or you have any knowledge about them, or you have anybody that you know has knowledge about them, we'd love to talk to you, right? Okay, so let's get rolling. As I told you earlier, we're going to talk about stewardship, and we're going to talk about it from a different perspective, because I think you can kind of, I mean, it's easy to talk about what we should do, right? When you want to put a number or put a metric on it, and I think that's where we kind of, it becomes easy. But I want to change that up a little bit, right? So we're going to start with a little etymology, right, which is the study of the origin of words and how they've changed in their definition over time. We're going to look at some Bible verses because we are a Bible-believing group. If you wonder where that, we are. So I'll just tell you that up front. So if you want to leave now, no one will really give you any hassle other than you, Brandon. You got to stay, all right? And then I'm going to put a little twist on the whole thing up because I'm going to use an example that I stole from John Tyson. Because I'm not that smart, I'm not that good, but other people are, and I know how to steal, right? Or how to make their words and kind of twist them and turn them into my own little bit, right? So we talk about stewardship often, right? And we talked about you, talk about me being called to be stewards. Why? Why stewards, right? And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a steward? So let's look at the word steward, and we'll do a little dissecting. If you remember your 8th grade biology class, dissecting frogs and maybe baby cats and as a freshman. So a steward is an official who is appointed by the legal ruling monarch to represent them in a country, and they may have a mandate to govern it in the name of the monarch. And if that's the case, it would be synonymous with the position of regent, vice-regent, or viceroy. So you could consider yourself a viceroy, same as a steward, right? And now here's where it gets fun, right? The etymology of steward is from the Old English word steward or stigward, from stig, meaning hall or household, plus weird, meaning warden or keeper. And if you're Dutch or you're German, you can go to, for Dutch it's stadholder, German it's Stadtholder, right, which is really a placeholder. And the Old English word stegward is attested from the 11th century. Right? Its first element is most probably steig, meaning house or hall. And that's really only attested, which means found or written, but not really defined in composition, right? So it was, you'd see it in a manuscript, but nobody can really translate them anymore. But the cognate, which means the same linguistic derivation, steigio, is the ancestor of the modern word sty, so like a pigsty, if you will. All right. The old French word is estuard. The old Norse, for those of you Vikings, where's my brother Dave? The Viking, right? It's stavador. So you can say you're a stavador ward, right? And that's also adapted from the Old English because the Vikings had invaded England. They had stolen a lot of their words. So there you go. So in medieval times, the steward was initially a servant, right? He supervised both the lord's estates and his household. He took care of the castles when they were away. He also checked on the taxes, right? So he had a lot of responsibility, a lot of autonomy, and he did what he needed to do in the Lord's name, right? In little L Lord, not big L Lord, right? Okay, so we just talked about that. So if the English word steward and its meaning weren't really developed to the 11th century, what was the original word that God used? Because we're talking stewardship from a godly perspective, right? All right, we're going to do a little Hebrew. You ready for some Hebrew? Formerly a dead language, reinvented or reconstituted in the 19th century from like the 208 BC until 1900. Hebrew was dead, right? It was used only in, it's kind of like Latin. It was only used in Jewish tradition in the synagogue, right? So we're going to do a little Hebrew as far as we know, right? Okay, so the phrase ben meshech is in Genesis 15:2, which is kind of the first place, right? It says, and Abram said, Lord God, what will thou give me? Seeing I go childless, and the steward, ben meshech, of my house is this Eleazar of Damascus. So that in that particular rendition, ben meshech is best rendered as son of acquisition or heir. All right. But this is disputed because, like I said, it was a dead language for 1,700 years or more. Some regard the text as hopelessly corrupt. Others offer no solution to the difficulty. In other passages, you're going to find the phrase ish al bayith. And it's conveniently translated as steward, right? Though literally it means man over the house, right? So that's kind of where the Hebrew piece was, right? If you look through the rest of the Bible, right, in the Old Testament, the word hal-matzar is in Daniel. It's in 1:11. Right? Then said Daniel to Melzar, and the translation is hal-matzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And in the King James, that's translated as a proper noun. So look at your King James, and it's going to be Melzar with a capital M, right? And that's certainly a mistake if you look at it, right? Because if you look in the margins of the original King James translations, the rendering is the steward, right? So hal-matzar should be the steward. Now, when you get to the New Testament, now we're getting into Greek, a little bit more common language that we can kind of get to, right? And there's two words, right? There's epitropos, and if you're a Greek speaker, you can correct me later. I listened to it like 15 times on Google Translate, and that's as good as I got. And the other one is oikonomos, right? And they're the words most commonly used. Now, they denote similar positions, and really the exact difference can't be clearly defined. I mean, they're sometimes used almost synonymously. Others think the first word, epitropos, refers to the guardianship of persons, like a child's legal representative while they're growing up, while the latter word refers to the head servant appointed to manage the household. There would not, however, be any particular hard and fast line between the respective duties if you go back to the Old Greek, right? But when you look through the Old Testament, there aren't a lot of passages that directly use the word as it was translated into English as steward. There are not a lot. Here are three, right? I'll give you them. From Titus, right? For an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach, must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain. 1 Peter says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. And finally, in 1 Corinthians, this is how one should regard us, as stewards of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be faithful. So most places in the New Testament, when an example of what we might think of as a steward is used, the word manager, overseer, servant, or foreman is used, right? But when you boil it all down, you go back to the beginning, to the Greek, it all comes back down to those two words, right? Epitropos and oikonomos. And if you look at the three we just read, which are the only three that I could find, that depends on the version you want to look at. So you can come tell me later that you found 6, you found 5, but it depends on the version you look at. Those three are the biggest three. But if you look at those cases, it really comes back to oikonomos, which one of the definitions for that metaphorically is the apostles and other Christian teachers and bishops and overseers, right? So there you go. We've done a little bit of word study. Do you feel smarter? Have I bored you to death? Are you sleeping? You ready to talk a little bit? Okay. But really, if you look at the big picture, the concept of a steward as we think of it was well known in the Old Testament, New Testament times. And it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, if you think about it, most of the people where they reference a steward, like Abraham, or when Jesus was given a parable or whatever, it's people that are wealthy and have power. And they need some trusted advisor to take care of their affairs, right? So let's go back to the beginning. A little bit more word study, because I know you guys like it. Genesis 1:26-28 tells us, God said, let us make man in our own image and after our likeness. Let them have dominion. Remember that word, that might be important later. Over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and every other thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In image of God, he created him male and female. And God blessed him, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So just for a minute, we're going to camp right here. Just not real long, but just for a minute. All right. So the word that God gave wasn't steward. He didn't say steward the earth. He said take dominion over the earth. So what's that all about, right? I'm not here to talk about dominionship. I'm here to talk about stewardship. So Hebrew, already decided it was a dead language, reinvigorated in the 19th century. The word that they used there was rada. And its definition is to rule, to have dominion, which I hate when you use a definition and you use the word that you're defining in the definition. That does not help me at all. But that's what it says, right? It says to rule, to have dominion, to dominate. And that was the plan, right? So when God created man, we were to dominate and have dominion over the earth in the pure form. We were really designed to run the earth for God. God said, hey, I made this place, boom, take care of it. I'm in you, you're perfectly designed, you have no flaws, you're not sinful, boom, do it. And what happened? We screwed it up. All right? So after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the plan changed, right? God said, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and live forever and take from the tree of life and eat. Therefore the Lord God set him out of the garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. And here's where we're really going to camp out, right? We camped out for dominion for just a second, but it was really to get us to work, right? One last word study, and then we'll be done with word studies for the most part. The Hebrew word for work is abad, and its definition is to work and to serve. And it's if you break it down, it's like 5 sub-meanings, which is kind of cool, right? Number 1 is to labor or to work, to do work. Number 2 is to work for another. Number 3 is to serve another by labor, to serve as subjects. Number 4 is to serve, and this is really defined as to serve God. And finally, number 5 is to serve with Levitical purposes, right? So to serve as a priest or whatever, right? So this is the place that I want us to view the idea of stewardship from, right? God put us here to work. And if you look at how often and how the word abad is used in the Old Testament, it's amazing. Right? If you want to go do a study, if you're a geek like me, you want to do a study, it's used over 230 times, that word in the Old Testament, right? And in those 230 times, it's used to denote service or worship. And it's only used at all 290 times, right? So 230 of the 290 times that it's used, it's about service or worship. That's pretty impressive when you talk about the word work. And I don't know, 90-some% of the time it's to work for service or worship. To me, that's pretty important, right? So what that said to me as I was working on this and praying through it was, we're here to serve and worship. That's it, right? Our service should be an act of worship, and our worship should be of service to both God and men. That's what hit me. And I think that makes sense, right? Now, if you want to do a little bit of history, I'm a history geek. I'm just a geek. So a lot of geek things I'll do. But if you look back historically, stewardship as we use it, right? As we're using it right now tonight in this talk, as you go find a book in the library or find a book in your Christian bookstore about stewardship, it's a pretty recent occurrence. It really started in the late 1800s, and it was really then around the area of financial stewardship, because as America grew, the rest of the world kind of followed us, stopping the governmental support of churches, right? So these churches they're like, hey, we're used to folks giving us money, and no one's doing that. The government's not giving it. We're no longer the Church of England, or we're no longer whatever. So no one's giving us money. So it really became a place where the churches were, they battled with a lack of funding, right? So they kind of turned it into financial stewardship. That was the beginning in the late 1800s, right? And then it transformed into the 3 T's: time, talent, treasure. And that was somewhere in the mid 1900s or so. Depends on who you look at, who you read. It's like 1945 to 65. I don't know. I was born in 65, so I didn't really think about it when I was 1, right? But one of the authors he likened it this way, right? Faith today is something that we kind of observe generally on weekends, right? We think about on the weekends. But for the people of the 19th century, it was something they lived, right? It informed every aspect of their lives, from birth to death and every stop along the way. Now, this was long before the rise of secular humanism, postmodern enlightenment, whatever you particular psychological thing you want to read. But really what happened is, a lot of these, when that all happened, a lot of these older traditions kind of fell by the wayside, right? The norms that people had fell by the wayside because, now we're all about us. We're all about individuality, and we're all about how do we get ahead? How do we strive forward? So now we have to be taught, and we have to teach what was once caught, right? And if you've been around here, you've heard Mark say it, you've heard me say it. Oftentimes, more is caught than taught, right? So what your dad did, what your granddad did, what your uncles did, what the men in your life did, you learned because it was caught, not because they were necessarily teaching you, because they were just showing you, and you're like, hey, that's what Uncle Joe does. That's what I'm going to do, right? But now we don't do that, right? We don't. And in the faith realm, that's not always the case. Now we have to teach it because there's not so many kids and people growing up in the faith, right? And maybe I'm wrong. Shout me down if you want. I'm okay with that. But maybe I'm wrong. But here's what Paul says, and I think he carries this theme to what I think it's logical conclusion. I'm going to give you two translations because I'm that kind of guy. We're going to do the Message because I think it's a good modern way to talk about it, and we're going to do the ESV because that's my favorite. So from the Message. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to the culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Okay? So that's from the Message. And there's more up there, but the meat is what I just gave you, right? But if you prefer from the ESV, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect. Amen. I agree. So in all our lives, what we steward should be in service and in worship, right? Maybe it doesn't still quite make sense. I'm okay if that doesn't make sense. It's still kind of processing through my brain, right? So let's bust it apart just a little bit more, right? And we can talk about the big three: treasure, time, talent. How are we stewarding those things that God gave us, right? But I want to make it more basic because I want us to not ask ourselves, am I stewarding my money, my time, my talent in a way that honors God? I want us to flip the script and say, is my life honoring God, right? We, men generically, and this current modern age, we love to compartmentalize our lives because it's so much easier. And I've been there. I'm still there quite often because it is easy to go, this is my life here. This is my life here. They don't cross streams, right? It's like the old Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams or you're going to get the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, right? So we don't want to cross the streams because it's easy to compartmentalize, right? But we do it so often, and we make lists and checklists. It seems like we're keeping score, right? You get to the end of the week, you go, did I give my 10%? And you do the math. Oh, crap. Only 9.25%. Son of a bucket. I'm screwed, right? Or the next week, you're like, hey, I gave 12.4. Man, I'm good, right? So let's get rid of that, right? Let's do what Paul encourages us to do, right? With God's help, place all of our life before God as an offering. And that's where I want to be. I'm certainly not there by any stretch. Those of you who know me, you understand that. So you can give me feedback later. Not right now, but later. But with God's help, I'm getting there. And I'm a lot better than I used to be. If you knew me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you go, different guy, right? All right, I'm going to start winding down because it's 7:04, but I did tell you I'm going to make a little bit of an application study, right? So stay with me. I know I've kind of been over the map, so if you're getting a little bit of whiplash, we'll ease it in for landing, right? So I'm not sure if you know who John Tyson is. He's an Australian pastor, speaker, and author. He lives and preaches at the Church of the City in New York City. We use his teaching and preaching as a guide. His recent book, Fighting Shadows, we use as the theme, if you will, for our last retreat. Solid guy, solid teaching, good stuff. He's a powerful advocate for men and for fatherhood. So if you don't know who he is, you can just Google John Tyson, Jon Tyson, Tyson. I think Ty likes him because he's got the same name, Tyson. So I think that's why Ty likes him, but I think he's pretty good all over, right? Anyways, he sends out a weekly email. Comes out on Thursdays. I get it. I stole it from Ty. Ty sent us forwarded us a copy one time, and I'm like, I like that. So I started getting it, right? It's always good. I mean, it's not always life-altering, but it's always good. It's generally thought-provoking, spirit-provoking, if you know what I mean, spirit-provoking. But 2 weeks ago, his email struck a chord with me as I was preparing this talk, because I told you it takes me a while to start these talks. And I hope it lands for you as well as it did for me. If it doesn't, sorry, John Tyson's work, not mine. So John talks about giving us the eulogy at his father-in-law's funeral, right? He was 82 years old. He was a Methodist pastor his entire life, and he delivered thousands of sermons. And John said, I'd heard many of them, but I really couldn't remember much of what he said. And I thought to myself, well, that's pretty true. I can sit through Taylor's message, and next week I don't probably remember most of it. Maybe by Wednesday I don't remember a lot of it. And I don't think I'm unusual. That's probably a lot, right? So I mean, really, how often do we not remember that, right? But John goes on to point out, he says, his father-in-law had lived a sermon. His life was a sermon. So like it or not, he said, every man preaches a sermon with his life. More than words, it's the arc and the depth of a life that speaks, right? And the Apostle Paul, he understood this when he told the Corinthians, you yourselves are our letter of recommendation written on our hearts to be known and read by all. And what it comes down to is this. We all preach 5 sermons with our life. In the end, what we say with our lives comes down to 5 words. Dust, sweat, blood, tears, scars. Right? So dust, for out of it you were formed. You are dust, and to the dust you shall return. Right? This speaks to our first and most foundational sermon, humility. So again, back to the words, because I love words, right? The Latin word humus refers to the earth, a fertile, life-giving soil, and it's the root of the word human. And likewise, humility comes from the word humilitas, meaning grounded or close to the earth, right? So we already talked about this, right? Modern culture tells us we're autonomous. We're masters of our own fate. But if you're like me, your body preaches a whole different sermon, right? I mean, our bodies preach a very different sermon. They preach humility, right? They hunger. They tire. They're sore. They grow old. They die. A man's humility, his reverence for the fragility and the gift of life, I mean, that'll preach against pride and self-reliance, right? So the second sermon is this, right? It's sweat. And this is about the dignity and the necessity of doing good work. This is the sermon of showing up day after day, doing what needs to be done without fanfare or recognition. It's the father who works 2 jobs to provide for his family, the volunteer who serves faithfully for decades, the guys who come in here and set up this sanctuary every Monday for us, right? The guys who make coffee in the back, the mentor who invests for the next generation, all of those things, right? And we live in a world that swings between 2 extremes, work as a necessary evil or work as our self-actualization or our identification, right? But if you look, I mean, neither view is biblical. We've already seen work existed before the fall. I mean, God gave Adam work to do. So when we labor, even in unseen places, we participate in God's work of creation and renewal. I mean, Christ dignified work. And he spent most of his life as a carpenter. Long before, I mean, he was shaping wood long before he was shaping hearts. And so your work, how you labor, what you create, what you do, it either pushes you and pushes the world towards redemption, or it contributes to its brokenness. And I want you to realize this one thing, right? Your work is both worship and witness. And here's the third sermon. It's blood, the sermon of sacrifice. And it's been said that every man will bleed for something in his lifetime. And the question is, what? What will you bleed for? We live in a culture addicted to comfort and self-fulfillment. And in that culture, sacrifice is seen as an interruption to life. But in reality, sacrifice is the very means by which true life is transmitted. Everybody knows this. Really, every parent knows this. Every faithful spouse understands this. Every leader who carries the weight of responsibility lives this. Sacrifice isn't a tragic necessity. It's the currency of love. And I'm not talking about the false martyrdom that seeks attention. You know, oh, I sacrifice so much. I do this, I do that. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the quiet, daily pouring out of self for others. Right? So a man's life truly declares what truly matters by what he chooses to bleed for. All right, number 4 is tears, right? So Jesus wept at the death of his friend Lazarus, right? He wept in the Garden of Gethsemane. He wept over the city of Jerusalem. Tears are not signs of weakness. They're indicators of what truly matters for us. The famous French author and philosopher Albert Camus once said, "Men must live and create, so live to the point of tears." In our tears, we find both humanity and our deepest values. Tears of pain will connect us to our own vulnerability and the suffering of the world. They remind us that we are not immune to the brokenness around us. Tears of joy, on the other hand, connect us to beauty, to the moments of grace that break into our daily existence. In the garden, Jesus wept tears of anguish, fully embracing the weight of his mission. His tears were a prelude to his ultimate sacrifice, a moment of profound honesty before God. I mean, he sat there, he cried and he prayed, "Lord, take this cup from me," right? And our tears, like Christ, they're sacramental, right? They wash away pretense and they reveal the true state of our heart. They're the silent prayers that words can't express, the deep groans that reach the heart of God, right? So a man will preach what he loves by the tears he weeps. And the last sermon is scars, right? Scars are proof of both wounding and healing. They tell stories of pain, but also of survival, redemption, resurrection. If you read any psychology, the psychologists would tell us, the ones that study post-traumatic stress, that growth post-trauma confirm what the saints have always known, that adversity can deepen compassion. It can deepen resilience and wisdom. Scars aren't just a reminder of past wounds, right? They're testimonies of healing. If you're still wounded, you're bleeding. If you have a scar, you're healing, right? So they're testimonies of healing. Can we allow our brokenness to become a source of healing for others? I mean, we're not talking about, not glorifying suffering. You know, I suffer so much. That's not what we're talking about. Right? We're talking about recognizing that our scars, like Christ, can point to the possibility of transformation. If you remember in the Bible, right, Jesus appeared to his disciples after the resurrection. He didn't erase the scars. He showed them, right? He showed his wounds, and in seeing his wounds, his followers were filled with joy. So these 5 sermons, dust, sweat, blood, tears, and scars, I mean, they're going to form the sacred biography of a man's life, right? Together they preach the fallenness and our hope of restoration. First off, dust reminds us we're creatures dependent upon God. Sweat calls us to meaningful labor. Blood speaks of love through sacrifice. Tears speak of a wholehearted participation in life. And scars proclaim the hope of redemption. So here's the question. I'm pretty much done. But here's the question I want you to think about, right? And it's not whether your life is preaching these sermons. It is, right? The real question is this: are you preaching the story well? Are you pointing toward the ultimate sermon, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus? What are you saying with the gift that is your life? Are you, as Paul would say, by the mercies of God, presenting your lives, dedicating all of yourselves, set apart as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your rational, logical, intelligent act of worship? There's the third translation, amplified, because I love that one too, right? So is it doing that, right? Is your life pointing people the right way? Are you giving your life to Christ, right? So that really wraps us up, with the exception of one final thing, right? So I talked about this in the beginning, right? I want to have an opportunity to put our action into service for the community of Upward Men. A lot of talented men sitting in the room tonight. A lot of other folks that aren't here. But one thing that we want to have available to us is like a directory, if you will, a list, talents that you're willing to share with your brothers, right, here in the community. I'll give you a couple examples. So, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, I'm working on the brakes on my Dodge pickup. Pretty new Dodge. It's 2017. Only got 35,000 miles on it, but I'm replacing the brakes because they're seized up. I've done brakes, so I'm not completely that kind of geek, but I've done brakes. And I'm working on my brakes for a couple of days. I can't get them to quit locking up. So I called my brothers in Upward because I knew he was good with that kind of stuff. He came out and helped me, right? Another story. So a couple of years ago, Mark Stouter gives me a call. Hey, can you help me put a roof on my stepdaughter's mobile home? Sure. Now, Mark paid me. He didn't have to. I was going to do it for free, but Mark wanted to pay me, so I took his money because I am retired, living on a fixed income. But I would have done it for free. It wasn't about the money. So what I'm saying is, I mean, that's it. It could be this simple, right? It could be, I'm a bank teller, but I love working on cars. And if you need help working on your car, give me a call. I may not be able to help you on Tuesday, but I may be able to help you, right? And it could be something that you get paid to do, right? Maybe like, hey, I own a paint shop in Linden, or I own a paint shop downtown Bellingham. If you need paint, come see me. Because, I mean, if you're like me, I'd much rather give my money to a Christian brother through his business or where he works, if it's the right thing to do, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to kind of build that thing up. I mean, if you find yourself in a pickle and you need some help, we want to have brothers available to help you. So, I mean, and again, it's not to take advantage of someone's well-meaning, good intention to go, I'm going to call Rick every Thursday to help me do this because I don't want to do it, and Rick's got nothing else to do, so he'll come help me. That's not the point, right? We're all mature men, right? But it's really about, hey, how can we hold each other up? We do that in prayer already, but how can we hold each other up physically, right? Our physical needs and our community needs. I mean, that's really what it's about, right? So you're going to find sheets on your tables. Put that information on. And again, if you're willing to help with the Facebook or Google ads or the podcast, reach out to one of us. We'll talk through it. And I do want to leave you with one last thing, right? I'm not really an NFL fan, but I do like the Buffalo Bills. So I'm going to leave you with the words of the inimitable current NFL MVP, Josh Allen, of the Buffalo Bills. Be good, do good, God bless, go Bills. All right, so enough for me. We got some questions coming up for the table talk. Let's have table talk and have a great night. Thank you.